Chapter 15. Truth. Truth is a subject of less and less concern to modern man. The Dictionary of the History of Ideas, 1974, carries no separate entry on truth, although the index volume has a number of references to it. D.D. Resnes's Dictionary of Philosophy, 1960, carried entries on truth and 5 related concepts: truth semantical, truth function, etc. Charles A. Bayliss, in his entry on truth, distinguished between 3 concepts concerning the nature of truth. First, the correspondence theory holds that a proposition or meaning is true if there is a corresponding fact. If we say, "It's raining here now," this is true if it is indeed raining here now. Second, the coherence theory holds that a proposition is true, quote, insofar as it is necessary. Indefinite article. Come on. Is true insofar as it is proposition, quote, insofar as it is a necessary constituent of a systematically coherent whole, end quote. The absolute, as the one systematic coherent whole, best fits this requirement. Third, the pragmatic concept is that a proposition is true insofar as it works. This is, on the whole, an adequate statement. Variations can be fitted into this framework. On the whole, however, this is an intellectual and rationalistic... Oh, my voice is integrating into the void downward. On the whole, however, this is an intellectual and rationalistic framework. In John 14:6, I'm just getting into the groove here, don't worry. In John 14:6, we are told, quote, Jesus saith unto him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. It is possible to place this statement under Bayliss's second concept, but only at the cost of rendering meaningless Jesus' statement. John 1:17 declares, quote, For the law was given by Moses, but grace and truth came by Jesus Christ. Truth came into this world as a person. This is a statement which shatters Bayliss's framework. But Bayliss's statement is still important because it describes how non-Christian men have thoughts. More exactly, for most people until recently, the correspondence and the coherence theories have prevailed. Truth is what the facts are, or truth is whatever is a part of a consistent and coherent whole. Modern philosophy has increasingly held to the pragmatic view of truth, although under a variety of names. Friedrich Nietzsche, in Beyond Good and Evil, affirmed the pragmatic view so that a lie, being more useful, can be better than the truth. He held that a lie is a condition of life. Truth confers no advantage and often means a serious disadvantage. Nietzsche, however, wrote when the issue of truth versus falsehood was still an important one to the community of intellectuals and educators. Since then, pragmatism has won too thorough a victory, and the issue is held to be a dead one as to whether or not truth is important. In a famous lawsuit of the 1980s and 1990s, the issue was whether or not an interviewer had the right to invent statements and attribute them to the man interviewed. In the 1990s, cases have occurred where statements, incidents, and sequences have been invented and presented as history. To question such falsehoods is regarded as naive. There are those who regard a concern for truth as a relic of Christianity, unfit for a post-Christian era. At the same time, truth is less relevant in courts of law, where perjury is commonplace and its punishment is rare. Some feel that it is naive to expect witnesses to tell the truth, that is for the jury to sift out. Paradoxically, even as lying goes unpunished when done under oath, we have the development of a strange doctrine called truth in advertising. The Associated Advertising Clubs of the World, in a conference in America in 1911, first formulated the idea of truth in advertising. It was in time used against the advertisers. It was never intended to mean, as in court, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. The courts in Britain, 1891, and the US began to insist that advertising is a promise and non-delivery an offence. Hyperbole and what was once called a reasonable flourish were banned. For example, slogans like "worth a guinea a box" or "pure as the tear that falls upon a sister's grave," a port wine slogan. The result has been a struggle between the advertiser and the consumer. How to suggest something without incurring a liability? At the same time, the courts seem to believe that the advertisement must be incapable of giving any misconception. At the same time, the courts seem to believe that the advertisement must be incapable of giving any misconception to the simplest idiot. Thus, at the same time that courts of law have grown indulgent of perjury, an extreme standard of truth has been established for advertisers. This has been due more to an anti-capitalist mentality than to any concern for truth. This represents, therefore, not a concern for the truth, but an animosity to a particular segment of society. In some sense, this is still a testimony to an older doctrine of truth, in that it recognizes that many people have a lingering loyalty to that ancient doctrine. In civil government, for example, congressional investigations use this old loyalty to the truth to impugn various persons and groups. The idea of a real truth is used pragmatically. There is another aspect to this question. The non-pragmatic doctrines of truth, whether Christian or non-Christian, relate to some doctrine of God or the absolute, something transcendent. But what if truth is related to something else? The new doctrine of the ultimate will alter radically one's concept of truth. The great change brought in by the Enlightenment and made emotionally central by men like Rousseau was the ultimacy of nature. The Marquis de Sade made the substitution and developed it systematically. If the God of Scripture is the supreme being, then his law revelation and his incarnation in Christ define the truth. However, if nature is ultimate, then the truth is whatever occurs in nature, and a lie is whatever opposes nature, that is, biblical law and morality. The truth meant for Sade and his successors: murder, rape, incest, sodomy, etc. Nothing in nature requires the punishment of any such acts. The result is a moral revolution. God and his Son are evil and Satan is good and the champion of freedom. To revolt against God is to revolt against oppression and tyranny. Oh, I thought it was... I didn't expect that. Oppression. In this perspective, the whole moral world is turned upside down. Thus, while in part the ancient doctrine of good and evil survive as the belief of many, in practice a new concept has replaced them. If man is ultimate as he is to the humanistic and existentialist perspective, the truth is what man, the new God, declares it is. There can be no higher frame of reference than man in such thinking. But man, in the modern worldview, represents a strange contradiction. He is, first, the highest point of evolution, a self-conscious being who is both a definer and a creator. But second, he is a part of an evolutionary process and a passive product who is only marginally self-conscious. Most of his life lies in his unconscious being. This means that he can be manipulated and should be. This is a doctrine which invites totalitarianism. This means commonly, quote, power for its own sake, end quote, and the, quote, enjoyment also in the power to humiliate, end quote. Powdermaker, writing of this with respect to Hollywood and the film industry, concluded, quote, Hollywood had the elaborated totalitarian elements we have described, the concept of people as property and as objects to be manipulated, highly concentrated and personalized power for power's sake, an amorality and an atmosphere of breaks, continuous anxiety and crisis, end quote. I have at various times written and spoken about modern man's will to fiction. Never before in history has man's time been more devoted to the unreal, to fiction. He feeds on this in films, novels, televisions, and in other ways. A considerable amount of his time goes into a passive submission to such fiction because modern man wants it. The 20th century has been dominated by this will to fiction. Much of its politics has been marked by its intensely cultivated love of fiction. This should surprise no one. When people turn their backs on God's truth, they will hunger for untruth, for fiction, and they will live in the world. Rookie mistake. For fiction, and they will live in the world of their imagination. It is always surprising how much people are given over in their imagination to hopelessly unrealistic ideas and emotions. Such imaginings are a product of modern humanistic education. People are encouraged to hope for and dream about things impossible for them. To cite a very obvious example, a widow in her 50s found films, television, and popular music as marvellous stimuli to encourage her to think of herself in romantic terms about a young man in his 20s. An attempt to help her to think realistically and practically was described as hateful and mean. In all such thinking, truth is a totally subjective concept. It is equated with what the person feels and wants. A world with no more truth than this is not only living a lie, but is also committing suicide. All right. Party one, party first part. Well, hope you like that. Man go blow blow, he's very blowing of mind, you know. Okay, so here's an idea. Why don't we hit the record and go on with chapter 16. Accidental person, man. Chapter 16. Accidental man. A change of culture means a change of language. The languages of Christendom have been more shaped by the Bible than people realize. Language reveals how we think or do not think. One can see in the dramatic changes in the language of youth from 1900 to the 1990s how the faith and culture of the United States has been altered. Western languages well into the 20th century reflected also the Greco-Roman heritage. The vocabulary of thought was often classical or an attempted fusion of the Christian and the classical. In fact, there is a philosophy of language, and the discipline has a variety of emphases. What is language in essence, and what does grammar tell us about thinking? These and like questions are not our concern here, other than to point out the complexity of the subject. A related subject is vocabulary. Our vocabulary reveals the perimeters, the boundaries of our mind and our thinking. Man has always been speaking man, from Eden to the present, never the primitive grunter of evolutionary fiction. However much some youth today seem to be imitating the fictional grunters, they remain human beings, persons, albeit sinful ones. The old vocabulary of Christendom spoke of substance and accident. Substance, Latin sub plus stare, and the Greek hypo plus stasis, to stand under, refers to the basic reality in, under, or behind things. The accident of things is that which changes, is on the surface. It is related to our idea of the accidental. The word comes from the Latin accidens, acciders, to happen, chance, a befalling, any fortuitous or non-essential property. The idea of chance was important in Greek thought. In Christian thought, the word accident came to mean non-essential. Aquinas summarized it clearly in two statements, quote, "That which is outside the substance of a thing and yet is belonging to the thing is called an accident of it." End quote. Again, an accident is, quote, "that whose nature is to exist in another." End quote. The language of substance and accident was very important to Western thought until the rise of Darwinism. What Darwin insisted on as the sole reality was the triumph of chance. All things developed out of nothing through chance. The only reality is chance. There is no substance to the universe or multiverse, only accidents. But with Darwin, substance was leached out of the universe and replaced with the omnipresence of chance. It was at this point that much criticism was levelled against Darwin. The world was ready to accept evolution as against God, but Darwin's theory, despite a slight blow to design, actually stressed chance variations. Thomas Huxley tried to defend Darwin, declaring, quote, "But probably the best answer to those who talk of Darwinism meaning the reign of chance is to ask them what they themselves understand by chance. Do they believe that anything in this universe happens without reason or without cause? Do they really concede that any event has no cause and could not have been predicted by anyone who had a sufficient insight into the order or nature? If they do, it is they who are the inheritors of antique superstition and ignorance, and whose minds have never been illumined by a ray of scientific thought. The one act of faith in the convert to science is validity in all times and under all circumstances of the law of causation. This confession is an act of faith because, by the nature of the case, the truth of such propositions is not susceptible of proof, but such faith is not blind but reasonable because it is invariably confirmed by experience and constitutes the sole trustworthy foundation for all action." End quote. Huxley knew better. He used a strategy commonplace to scientists since then of accusing critics of superstition and ignorance. With great condescension, the critic is treated as a man too ignorant to know what he is criticizing and as one who is painfully uncomprehending. The plain fact was that chance is basic to Darwin's perspective and to evolution. It still is. Hudson Hoagland, then Executive Director of the Worcester Foundation for Experimental Biology, "I like to do the biology, it's so cool in the apiary." Hudson Hoagland, then Executive Director of the Worcester Foundation for Experimental Biology, wrote that there are, quote, "only two answers to the question of how life began. It must either have risen spontaneously from non-living material or have been created by supernatural means." End quote. For Hoagland, the second alternative means, quote, "Science has nothing to contribute since a question cannot be resolved by the operational approaches of science." End quote. For Hoagland, chance can explain everything. For him, quote, "Evolution is creative, but its creativity is independent of purpose or design." End quote. R.W. Gerard, M.D., then of the University of Michigan, held that man's morals are accidents of his time and place. This is a logical conclusion. The universe and all things within it have been stripped of substance. stripped of substance within it have been stripped of substance. The existence of God is more than denied. It is dismissed as an unscientific and irrelevant question. Is it any wonder that all that remains of man is accidental man? He is not a being created in the image of God, Genesis 1:21-28. Rather, he is a struggling product of evolution. Lacking in definition by substance, he is a product of chance. Emile Durkheim, 1858-1917, in his Rules of Sociological Method, 1894, viewed criminals as evolutionary pioneers, exploring by their activities the next step in the evolution of man. Man, for Durkheim, had no fixed nature nor morality. Had no fixed nature nor morality, had no fixed nature nor morality. He was an accident of an evolutionary process, and his accidental nature would change and develop with time. For those in this tradition, the criminal is an interesting figure. And a fella like a For those in this tradition, the criminal is an interesting figure and an important one. It was altogether logical for Jean-Paul Sartre to take a homosexual criminal and hail him as Saint Genet, actor and martyr, 1963. Precisely because for Sartre and Genet God was denied, the new idea of the sacred was transferred to evil. The dedication to pure evil made Genet sacred in Sartre's eyes. God having been denied, there is no longer any true substance in all the universe. The accidental man, by his total dedication to an anti-God faith, affirms thereby the validity of the... You make big noise. Dedication to an anti-God affirms thereby the validity of the accident only, and the accident without substance has no point of reference and no meaning. Time in this framework has no meaning. Quote, sacred time is cyclical. It is the time of eternal recurrence. End quote. The sacred has thus become the meaningless, the evil, not the good. Okay, I take drink for mouth. I take drink. Good. Okay, let's redo that. I'm sounding a bit Tom Waits there. The sacred has thus become the meaningless, the evil, not the good. This is the triumph of the accident, and hence of accidental man. Let us consider the meaning of this pure evil, this triumph of the accident over substance. One of the characteristics of life in the Western world since at least 1960 has been the rise of mindless crime. Drive-by shootings, the random killing of innocent people, and the ready indulgence and torture of people who have done nothing are examples of mindless crimes, uncaused evil. Now, Christian ethics has sought to further good for good's sake, not a self-serving virtue, but one motivated by gratitude toward God for his goodness. Rather than a man-centered cause for self-promotion, Christian virtue is required to be goodness for goodness' sake, virtue for virtue's sake. The Christian must not avoid murder, adultery, or theft out of fear of the consequence, but out of a love of God and his moral law, out of a love for virtue. Virginity and chastity are not to be adhered to out of a desire to gain a better spouse, a better reputation, or to avoid a disease, but out of a regard for virginity and chastity. but out of a regard for virginity and chastity as the true way of life for virtue's sake. Now, evil seeks the same purity of dedication to evil. The purely professional criminal isn't crime for the money, for profit. He has no desire to do more than steal or kill as necessary. The perpetrators of mindless crime may steal or kill, but their basic objective is evil. A young man who enjoyed seducing and then leaving girls who were virgins responded when someone asked him why he went after some girls who had no special appeal. His response was, he wanted them because they were virgins. The appeal was evil for evil's sake. It was despoiling virtue. The accidental man hates the substantive life. He wants to prove that he is a he wants to prove that it is a fraud by destroying it. An interview with Fareed Zakaria, managing editor of Foreign Affairs, Lee Kuan Yew, Prime Minister of Singapore, except for an interlude from 1959 to 1990, when he allowed his deputy to succeed him, spoke of the change in the United States and elsewhere that had lessened his admiration and respect. Quote, Westerners have abandoned an ethical basis for society, believing that all problems are solvable by a good government, which we in the East never believed possible. End quote. Centuries ago, the East was wealthy and powerful, but certain ideas it held had evil consequences. Buddha's belief in ultimate nothingness was destructive of cultural strength and morality. In China, philosophy preceded Hume by many centuries in its epistemological skepticism. One philosopher questioned the real world. He held that it was difficult to say whether or not the dream world or the waking world was real. Such thinking meant cultural paralysis because, in its own way, it reduced humanity to the level of the accidental man. As reported by the Lofton Letter, quote, according to the George Barna Research Group, 4 out of 10 people who call themselves evangelicals don't believe there is such a thing as absolute truth. Says Barna, quote, it's pretty frightening. Of all US adults, 71% reject the idea of absolute truth. End quote. To reject absolute truth is to reject Christianity, the only God possible in such a universe, and the only logical Christ comes out of the cosmic accident. God and Christ then, if existing, are simply struggling in a cosmic accident to gain some kind of relevance. There can then be no absolute God, no decree of predestination, and no substance to law and morality, nor to man. Because the Western world has become the realm of accidental man, it is in danger of becoming the realm of fading men and fading cultures and nations. Accidental man is oblivious to all this. He believes God to be dead, and because of this absurdity, is himself dying. All right, you beautiful people, thank you very much for listening. Great to have you with me in the booth of the truth. And heavy stuff. Heavy stuff. I don't know what people are going to make of this as an audiobook. It ain't easy. You don't know how to make. All right, so great. If you want to support this work, you know what to do. You can go to nathanteacher.com, hit the donate button, ask me a question, whatever, write me a note. So thanks, and I hope to see you for the next installments, which ought to be chapters 16 and 17 of To Be As Gods.